In the wake of the Civil War, the culture of the United States changed drastically as a whole. The idea of manifest destiny had only been a dream for Americans, and after Reconstruction, it had become a reality. Many people moved westward in hope of seeing success mining gold, silver, and other minerals. With the sharp population increase in the West, Lincoln passed the Pacific Railroad Act in 1862 to connect the East and West, resulting in very fast travel. Following the construction of the railroad in the West, others went to the Great Plains to ranch and farm to gain profit. The Homestead Act and implementing open range helped the people of the Great Plains to start working on cheap land for a guaranteed profit. With all these changes in the West, Native Americans felt their culture was being jeopardized. As gold, silver, and copper were founded in the West, families in search of the American dream started to move west in order to find some of the precious metals in the hills of the West. These were some of the first settlers who came to the West in order to try making themselves a new life. As the news of a new deposit got out, a mass of miners would quickly make their way over. The miners that would arrive at a site first would use the tactic placer mining, the act of using simple equipment to get gold. After the surface minerals were depleted, large companies would come and start mining into the hills and deep into the surface. If the minerals dried up, they would either stop mining altogether or continue on a restricted basis. Towns that had a sharp population increase were called boom towns, and many miners lived in these boom towns. When the mineral deposits have been depleted, the economy of the towns crashes and the population sharply decreases when the town is empty. The crime rate was very high during these boom times, and law enforcement were very scarce at the time. Groups of people that tried to fight crime were called vigilance committees. They tracked down and punished criminals, and sometimes they punished people who were innocent and freed criminals, but always had justice in mind. The early mining towns were mostly populated by men, but as the towns grew, more women began to fill in. Some of the women in the town owned property which was not normal at this time. But along with the women who were influential, there was also those who worked at hurdy-gurdy houses. Hurdy-gurdies were hand-cranked musical machines, but if you asked what a hurdy-gurdy was, the common answer was a young German girl that stayed at bars and danced with lonely men for a price of a drink. The largest boomtown, Pikes Peak, had many miners who flowed in calling themselves 59ers. They created the slogan Pikes Peak or Bust, yet many who did not succeed said it was the Pikes Peak hoax. When the railroads were finished in 1889, farmers and ranchers started to buy homesteads around the railroad in 1889. This year, Congress divided the Dakota Territory into South Dakota, North Dakota, and Montana. Though many American settlers went to the Rocky Mountains to mine in the West, other Americans went to ranch in the Great Plains. Great Plains lies on the 100th meridian, going through North and South Dakota to western Texas. The Great Plains were not very popular in the mid-1800s due to the fact that there is not much water or viable soil in the land. There weren't many trees nor rivers, so the landscape was very flat throughout. Ranching in the plains seemed very difficult at first, due to the fact that water was very scarce. But a breed of cattle named the Texas Longhorn had adapted to the living conditions. Early in the development of the Great Plains, there weren't many cattle being raised due to the living conditions being very poor. However, after the Civil War ended and the construction of the railroad started, meat prices went higher than ever, making it very profitable to ranch cattle. Cattle raising was also improved with the development of open range, a large area of land owned by the government to help ranchers graze land for free of charge. Although open range sounds great, it led over 5 million cattle to be shifted off to slaughter. Cattle dealers also found a profit with the railroad. They figured if they brought their cattle to the railroad and shipped them to the east, they would be able to sell the cattle for much higher prices. The long drive was a prime example of a very successful shipment, and each cattle was sold for 10 times the normal price in Texas. Soon the Great Plains made up nearly 50% of the United States cattle. It was a major hub for cattle during this time period. This shaped America's cattle industry to what it is today. In the 1800s, farming was a big business due to the railroad expansion and the discovery of the Great Plains. The catchy slogan, "Rain follows the plow," was coined by a Nebraskan to sell the idea that cultivating the plains would increase rainfall, encouraging settlers to move there. For more than a decade, beginning in 1870, rainfall on the plains was well above average. The lush green of the prairies contradicted the popular belief that the region was a desert. In 1862, the government also supported settlement in the Great Plains by passing the Homestead Act. For a $10 registration fee, an individual could file for a homestead, a tract of public land available for settlement. A person who owned a homestead could claim up to 160 acres of land and could receive title to that land after living there 5 years. Life in the Great Plains wasn't always easy, though. The summers were extremely hot, and the winters had terrible blizzards, often destroying many of farmers' crops. Farmers who had financial problems in other states often moved to the Great Plains to plant wheat and take advantage of the low-cost land. Farmers who had financial problems in other states often moved to the Great Plains to plant wheat and take advantage of the low-cost land. The wheat belt was extremely successful for many farmers and made the U.S. the world's leading exporter of wheat by 1880. Native Americans struggled during the times of Western expansion. Many lives were lost and land was taken away from the natives. As many settlers came in to find gold and other minerals, they needed a place to stay. Between 1840 and 1870, more than 70,000 Native Americans were relocated and many died along the way. This was known as the Trail of Tears. The natives would get angry at the settlers, and gunfights would break out between the two groups, resulting in many casualties. The Indian Peace Commission was created to give shelter and land to natives who had nowhere to stay. This resolved many of the issues with fighting over territories. Nathaniel G. Taylor was the Commissioner of Indian Affairs and often forced people to sign treaties. As the natives searched for ways to live and hoped for good to come out of all that is happening, they started rituals and tribal celebrations. One of these rituals was called a ghost dance. A ghost dance is a celebration that one day they will find hope. As things began to fall apart, the natives needed to find a way to live. They hunted for buffalo on the plains and established better forms of discipline. Many thought that if Native Americans could follow the acts of Americans and do what they did, they would find an easier way of life. America was drastically altered in the years following the Civil War. The people of the West had been on a totally different path than the ones of the East. Yet many found new riches in the West. With the movement to the West, the majority of Native Americans' homes were ruined. As all their land had been taken away, their only compensation was being put on simple reservations. These reservations were supposed to be a gift for the natives, but only ended up being worse for them. With their land taken away, it gave new American explorers a clear path to the West. While in the West, the mining industry had began flourishing, as well as ranching in the Great Plains. Gold, silver, quartz, and other minerals in the western states had made many people wealthy. While the far west was being mainly mined, the Midwestern states were also flourishing. Cattle grazing and farming crops that needed little water made a great profit, and was made extremely easy with the implementation of open range and the Homestead Act. Throughout this time period, America was changing drastically, and changed the way people lived throughout the states.